The big one, I think, was the Red River rivalry. Yeah.
Yeah, that was huge. It was enormous. It was a great game. And I was at different times shocked and different times thinking to myself, yeah, it's about right. Yeah, it's about right. And I don't know where you want to start with this, but this was the game with the biggest implications. I think both teams were in the top 12, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yep.
So this one was the biggie. Here's what it comes down to. It comes down to belief. And it came down to belief because we knew Texas had been tested by Alabama on the road. Whatever your opinion of Alabama, that's the win of the year, essentially, thus far, just because of the talent on hand, just because of the coaching staff on hand. We did not know if we should believe in Oklahoma because of their schedule. So to pick Oklahoma is to say, I'm a Dillon Gabriel believer. I'm a believer in year 2 of Brent Venables. I'm a believer in this recruiting. Guys coming in like Peyton Bowen, the playmaker. Turns out believing in Peyton Bowen would have been a really good decision to make heading into this game. And for everything that would have been difficult to believe in with Oklahoma, considering how this game worked out last year without Dillon Gabriel, considering how the defense looked at various times last year, if you are a believer in Oklahoma and you are not an Oklahoma fan at any point, you feel something deep in your gut, in your loins, that I don't think a lot of people felt, given where Texas has been early on this year. So I ask you, Ty, what stood out to you in this game when you think about the rhythms of this game?
Well, I mean, I think, particularly impressed by Oklahoma's defense.
Yeah.
Oklahoma's defense, was not exactly the 85 Bears out there. It was not what you would consider a shutdown defense. However, as you and I spoke on the phone while I was at the supermarket earlier, picking up some alcoholic beverages that I might had to have broken open,
Wow.
wrong tensing, whatever,
It's okay.
in the event of a Notre Dame Louisville emergency.
Oh.
Um, Oklahoma's defense performed pretty well. 23 offensive points surrendered to a pretty good Texas offense.
I would say at times really good this season, given the weaponry available, given where the line has been, given the growth of Quinn Ewers. I think that's absolutely right. Given the context of where this Texas offense has grown into, seemingly really great performance from Oklahoma's defense.
23 offensive points allowed. Texas's first score was a block kick touchdown.
Punt, yeah.
Texas still had over 500 yards, but bear in mind this was a 49-0 loss last year for the Oklahoma Sooners. And in that game, and really all throughout the course of the year, whether on the field or off the field through the media, the Oklahoma defense was a punching bag. Ted Roof, especially on this show, was a punching bag. So the question now of whether or not this defense has gotten better, I think has been resolved. I feel like we answered that in large part before this week. But now, given what we saw holding down a good Texas offense in the manner that they did, you're only going to hold them down to some extent. I think that was pretty damn impressive. So for me, that was sort of, you want to talk about rhythms, you want to talk about takeaways, you want to talk about the main thing that you think of when you go back through and rewatch this game. It's the Oklahoma defense and how they performed. We could talk a little bit maybe about future ramifications and what this means in context. The other thing that I would throw out there, holy hell, is Dillon Gabriel good in this game?
He would drive me nuts if he were my quarterback. I said that on the preview show, just because there is a casual element to his game, right? He's sort of upright because he can't really go much lower and see over the line. He doesn't throw a hard pass. He's not making throws that are bullets over the middle. He plays within himself, and he's just a gamer, especially given the injury history. Absolute gamer. What did you think of the beginning of the game? Because that was the nutty thing, right? With the turnovers, 2 pretty early picks for Quinn Ewers, but he bounces back well. He gets, he fumbles the ball when he takes the huge hit from Peyton Bowen, the freshman safety for Oklahoma, in the second half. But there's a lot of back and forth. You mentioned the punt block touchdown that Texas I think it was a corner for Texas, fell on in the end zone for 7. But look, it's a fascinating watch because both of these teams sort of stayed locked in, and there were I think it was Fowler and Herbstreit on the call made mention of a few times where it's like they're hitting hard, right? This is like there's an extra little bit of energy on the field in the Cotton Bowl. And so for Oklahoma, Danny Stutzman at linebacker, especially making plays all over the field, like they just didn't back down. They found themselves in good places. They harassed Quinn Ewers often. And if you even look at the big plays that Texas was able to generate, whether it was through the air or Jonathan Brooks, he had the long touchdown run on the ground, they weren't bombing it over the top like they were able to do against Alabama, right? It was RPO stuff, and there were guys running wide open. There were big plays for Texas, but it wasn't the same kind of breakdown that we were used to seeing from this Oklahoma defense last year. And so it was calculated risks from Oklahoma. It was receivers not stepping up all the time for Oklahoma. I think it was Jaleel Farouk who had a couple big catches, and Nick Anderson obviously had the game-winning catch in the corner of the end zone. That's where I think Texas's biggest advantage in this game was, though it didn't really fully play out. Xavier Worthy made big plays. Play of the game, though, was Oklahoma stoning Xavier Worthy on that quick fourth down screen out wide on the goal line. Was it not?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it had to be. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt this about I made a YouTube short about this where it was just like Texas is all gas, no brakes. They set themselves up for a game winning or a potential game winning field goal with a minute 15 left. 3rd and 9, they don't even really try. It was sort of an unserious attempt at a first down with a rushing play. And it's okay to run it on 3rd and 9 if you're like, well, I've packaged it with a 4th down situation. And then they just turn to Burt Auburn, who has been a little bit shaky, but he nails the kick, but they leave Oklahoma a ton of time. And it felt like there were breaks in that moment for the Texas
Well,
offense.
I mean, Sark must have been at the same off-season conference as Jared Parker, because we can talk about that a little bit
Sure.
later on in the show. No, look, I mean, I think you're right about all that stuff. I mean, I would circle back to the beginning part of the game, right? The
Yeah.
beginning part of this game was everything a rivalry is supposed to be. It was frenetic, it was chaotic. It was both teams, I think, feeling some of the early game jitters.
Yep.
And eventually, as things normalized out, we got to see what each of these teams were made out of. The Quinn Ewers story to me is particularly interesting coming into this game because he had 0 turnovers on the year. Um, uh, Going into last week's
Yeah.
game
Oh,
against
into last
Kansas.
week. Yeah, he threw
Going
the
into
pick
last week's
against
game
Kansas.
against
Yeah.
Kansas, he had no turnovers. He threw the interception. Today, responsible for all 3 of Texas's turnovers, 2 interceptions and a fumble. All told, had a pretty good statistical game. It was not a bad game from a stat standpoint. Even from a regular standpoint, it was still pretty good, but the mistakes were quite
Yes.
costly. And I actually thought the broadcast did a pretty good job highlighting some of what he's going through. Like Holly Rowe talked about how he is working with like a coach on the side to help with his mental preparation, given the fact that he's like afraid of failure in moments like this. And, you hope for his sake that this doesn't do anything further to damage that state because it's, in sports, it's crazy. And especially when you've got so much pressure on you. Quinn Ewers is a hell of a quarterback. It was just a few of those yippee moments that got him. And thankfully for Oklahoma's sake, they were able to take advantage of it.